Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about Pakistan's economic revival at this time when we look at the efforts of the Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, his government, as we've seen Pakistan come out of economic turmoil through regulatory reforms. Of course, digital governance, tools like Regimeter, foreign investment in agriculture, IT and minerals, strategic partnership with the UK, Saudi Arabia, other allies. We'll be talking about the kind of upward trend that we've seen and what this means for the future when we look at the kind of trends this is setting in economy. Little later on, we'll also be talking about Afghanistan and what we've seen as far as Taliban and their refusal to participate in Iran-hosted regional peace talks. Of course, this has raised serious concerns about regional stability. We've also, of course, US captured military bases, advanced equipment to fractional power struggles between Kandahar hardliners and the Haqqani network. The Taliban consolidation of military assets, ideological extremism and support for cross-border insurgent groups, and the threat they pose to our neighborhood. All of that today on Perspective. I have me Dr. Usman Chohan, who's advisor on economy. Thank you so much for being with us today. We'll also be joined by Saeed Ali Ehsan, who's Chief Development Officer Prime. Thank you for being with us today. Dr. Usman, first of all, we've spoken about economy from time to time. In terms of how things are at this time, the trends at this time, how are you, looking at what has been done and how it's going to develop things for us as we go along?
First of all, it's such a pleasure to be with you on your show. Always such an interesting topic we touch upon, and today we're touching upon something that I think is very, very important, is to assess the trajectory thus far. So in the last 3 years, you've seen that we've gone through ups and downs globally.
Yeah.
And Pakistan came into an agreement with the IMF, which was a bitter pill to swallow. There was a lot of sacrifice involved in that. Part of that, as you mentioned, is regulatory reform.
Yeah.
And the IMF has released a new tranche based on its satisfaction with the measures that have been taken. But the IMF is still not sitting still. It does continually add or subtract tactical things. So it doesn't go strategic, we are on the same page, but tactically it says, why don't you work a little bit on this, on that? Because what the IMF is now appears to be quite sincere about is that Pakistan should at least have the next 10 years in a positive trajectory, and that this is a unique window that it has to encourage Pakistan to make serious reforms. So there are vested interests in our economy which are reticent for that change.
Okay.
But the political will, overarching political will, is so tremendous now that they are practically able to bulldoze through. Now that requires the sustained political will, that you need to maintain that momentum and not succumb to those vested interests. I'm confident that the political will be there to push further and further, and perhaps it will be very transformative for Pakistan, since we have managed so many exogenous shocks, whether it's Trump tariffs, whether it's the war in Ukraine, the war with India, the Iran-Israel war, everything there, COVID. So I think that the trajectory from now on will be positive. The only responsibility that I think is very important is that of our central bank working very hard to maintain the levers between currency, interest rate, and growth. And the rest of government should be very supportive of the central bank on that.
Let me also include Saeed Ali Ehsan in this. Ali, when we look at, moving from damage control, because that seemed to be the primary concern for a while, we are now moving towards more investment friendly, more making Pakistan a business destination. First of all, do you agree with that?
Do have a long way to go when it comes to Pakistan being a business friendly destination. I see that the government is still very selective when it comes to the way that it is inviting businesses into the country, but it's opening up more and more with every passing day. We're seeing a more open kind of attitude towards both foreign direct investment and international business as well. That's an improvement in policies, but we come from a very tight and stringent route. And because of that, we need to go a long way. And I think that instead of maybe selecting investors, the government should have a general framework for how other people, private businesses, and international investors can come into the country and conduct business without really interacting too much with the government machinery, and just conduct their business and pay their taxes. So there is some way to go. I see right now that many of the permissions, especially if you see the recent agreements with the crypto organizations. So there's an agreement made with Binance, an agreement made with HTX, and there are more players in the market, and we need to have all of those players in the market. It's a good start, but as long as the government can provide a framework where people can come in, spend their money, and conduct business, I think that framework is much needed still. It has come in some form in the Asan Karobar Act, and I think there are many other reforms that are also taking place. So I'm quite positive in general.
What about tools like Regimeter? In your opinion, are they going to be accelerating reform implementation and accountability?
I'm sorry, could you repeat your question, please?
I meant tools like Regimeter. Are they going to be accelerating implementation, in your opinion, and accountability? Because those have been concerns for us.
Yes. I mean, yes, accountability is a major issue, and actually, even in the 11 reforms, the structural reforms that were, that have been asked by the Pakistani government, by the IMF, corruption and accountability are one of those things that really need some attention. So, yes, definitely, fast tracking the implementation of these tools will go a long way in getting that environment.
Let me come back to you. Dr. Usman, do you agree that, of course, I think it's what Ali is saying is that, yes, there is, of course, a long way to go. But in terms of the pace and how we've managed to come this far in whatever time, I think that it's something that we really need to sort of, not lose sight of the goal, but also sort of assess, how quick in that sense that it's been, in terms of what was predicted initially, if you remember.
Precisely. I would like to extend my greetings to Ali Saab. We were in conversation just a few days ago. He spoke very, very eloquently about the subject, particularly on state-owned enterprises. And it's thinking fast and slow. There is some truth to the fact that our expectations of channeling Pakistan's energies is very high. There is a clock that is running out in the sense that we add 6 million new people to our population. You extrapolate that means 6 million new jobs have to be created. That tension is constant, and people are having more open, thankfully, very open conversations about our population growth rate and how unsustainable and reckless our population growth is. But at the same time, you are making an important comment here that consider how volatile things were around the world and in Pakistan just 3 years ago. And these setbacks that hit developing countries, whether it's climate change like floods or it's the COVID or anything like that, they can push you back. So there is this modernist perception of growth and growth into infinity, and we will just keep moving along a linear path. That itself has to be questioned, because we are in a tug of war where we have to look at the sustainability of society, the progress of technological innovation, and the purpose of men and women in society. So that exists.
So what about Regimeter then? This is what I asked Saeed Ali Hassan also. How do you see this playing in, working within the framework for efficacy when we look at accountability and implementation?
I believe that all transparent tools that are technologically driven will assist us, because the technification, the digitization of our economy is perhaps the best, least politically intrusive way, and arguably the most effective way to push for transformation by bypassing the vested interest. Therefore, any tracking methods that can assist with that are good ones.
Right, fair enough. Ali, when we look at, for example, issues like tariff rationalization, We also looking at, support, export competitiveness, of course, and industrial revival. How is this working within the current framework, in your opinion, to increase, for example, the kind of industrial revival that we've envisaged? What we want to become in terms of an industrial savvy nation, in terms of a rapidly growing nation, when we look at the industrial sector particularly.
That question's for me.
Ji.
I think tariff rationalization was an excellent move. I had been working very closely with many of the experts that were involved. Namely, I think one of the former ambassadors to the WTO, Dr. Manzoor, really critical perspective this time they had in the new national tariff policy, and I think that is going to have a really big impact. But I would like to also shed some light on of the country. So this is something that needs to be discussed a little bit more in detail, because whenever I do talk to policymakers and policies people in the government, what I'm seeing is a propensity towards industrialization in the sense of manufacturing. And while manufacturing is one of those big sectors that the world relies on when it is trying to grow, I think in terms of Pakistan, with the large youth bulge, the services sector and the agriculture sector and the mechanization and digitalization of society as a whole is actually more important than industrialization and manufacturing sector growth itself. So I think that there is too much of an emphasis on the production of goods when Pakistan has great potential for the export of services and also for the expansion of the agriculture sector through mechanization. And I think that needs to be something that once that comes into the center of government policy and emphasis, I think then Pakistan will truly be unleashed.
Fair enough. Dr. Usman, do you think that we are adequately sort of, working this? You mentioned, of course, overpopulation. It is a huge concern. And like you said, it is now being candidly discussed. Mm-hmm. Are we also working towards, active solutions in terms of, and that is something, no matter what the scale of our growth is, we have to be able to sort of clamp down on this issue. Do you think that we are adequately addressed at this time? Do you think that we are adequately working towards, as a society, trying to deal with it? Because whatever resources, no matter at what level, then they would have to be equated with the kind of population that the trend that we are seeing.
I think that your judgment on this would be superior to mine, in the sense that the root of this rampant population expansion is the lack of empowerment of women. Whenever a society sees greater equality in the economic sphere and empowers women as investors, as employees, and as stakeholders, you see that they begin to prioritize not the quantity but the quality of the children. We want to have a vibrant society with youth in it, but we want them to be our asset rather than our liability, and they are in our hands. They don't make decisions for themselves, so the responsibility is on us. So because we have not empowered our women to the extent that would be desirable and that would speak to the aspirations of the founder of Pakistan, as well as the Mother-e-Millat, the mother of the nation, because we don't speak to them or their aspirations, we fall behind. And until that empowerment is reached, I think a comprehensive solution is impossible. What we do see instead is piecemeal but sincere efforts. However, because we have to take 250 million people forward, it cannot be done in a piecemeal manner. And instead you see the stratification of society where highly educated, eloquent and patriotic people may choose to have just 1 or 2 children because it is sustainable and they can invest in the quality of that child. At the same time, there are others who expect that somehow whether they go through medieval notions of it and their superstitious worldview, that each kid will be able to bring their own fortune with them, and as a result, this country has been steeped in misfortune.
Also, when we talk about the kind of projections that we've seen as far as IMF is concerned, we are looking at from crisis. Of course, economic growth has moved, but it remains constrained. But at the same time, we are looking at GDP growth expected to rise from 2.6% to 3.2, which is a jump. We are also looking at Pakistan, remaining on a narrow stabilization path. We, of course, have a heavy debt burden. We have limited relief for households. In that kind of an environment, do you think we've been able to sort of stabilize things? We've been able to sort of clamp down on what was expected in terms of, we've spoken about it. When we look at inflation, for example, those issues, we've at least been able to stem that kind of increase.
Fully agree with you. Credit where credit is due, the stabilization has been attained. And stabilization is a function of sacrifice, and sacrifices have been made by the government and by the people. And so the credit where credit is due, the IMF expresses its satisfaction. I express my own personal satisfaction. Now, but we have previously also in history attained such levels of stabilization and then failed to go into growth. Because the sacrifice that you require for growth then would mean that you veer back into the tendencies that may destabilize you. So sustainable growth is an art form. It's not a science, it's an art form. And therefore, I believe that this time, before we leap into the tendencies towards growth, we must truly secure stabilization, which means that austerity may last longer than required previously, but that is the need of the hour. So stay the course is my advice in that regard.
Ali, when we look at where we are with regard to foreign investment, of course, we've also seen at this time Pakistan's foray into, a lot of diplomacy, a lot of international diplomacy, a lot of, whether we look at US, whether we look at rare earth minerals, there has been, considerable advancement when we look at talks being held, when we look at moving forward in terms of agreements also. Do you think that investment now seems tangible? It seems within grasp at least.
I'm sorry, I couldn't really hear your question. If you could just shortly repeat it. You're talking.
Ali, I'm, actually when we look at this time, Pakistan's foray into diplomacy, when we look at our diplomacy with, for example, the US, we've also seen, Saudi Arabia, we've also seen, China as usual, our strategic partner. When we look at the diplomacy at play at this time, do you think that it has facilitated, for example, rare earth minerals is just one area, but we've also seen that, now that kind of foreign investment into these areas seems tangible. It also seems within grasp. We are also looking at agreements. We are also looking at, things that on paper at this time that are likely to actually translate into tangible gains. Am I correct?
Yeah. So yes, I think definitely the attitude of the government, especially on foreign or international forums, has been excellent. They have been very welcoming towards international business and have been very forthcoming towards the international agreements and different relationships that we have with not only the Western world, but also with other partners, especially China. It's Pakistan is right at the center of a very important geopolitical and geoeconomic location, and so this balancing act has been done really well. I think that this is going to translate into real gains, but those real gains, of course, will come over time, because I think what Pakistan really has lacked, especially over the last few decades, has been a certain environment for businesses and for long-term agreements. And I think that if the government is able to, what the government has really done well is that it has, not only interacted well with the international stakeholders, but also managed the internal stakeholders very well. And that means that it does put itself in a position of certainty and a position of certainty from where it can provide others with certainty. And that makes for a very good, financing environment and investment environment where people want to put their money in and they expect long-term gains and stability and safety also.
Right, fair enough. Um, Dr. Usman, we are, of course, dealing with challenges, even though, we seem to have surmounted some, and we've taken leaps and bounds in some areas. When we look at international relations, like Ali was saying, there's also, we've made considerable progress, but also, there is relative certainty at this time, and I think that this is what he mentioned also, and that, of course, is extremely lucrative for those, that kind of investment that can come in, and also for local investors. So you think that, in that sense also things are on the right track, even when we deal with the kind of terrorism that comes from, the Afghan Taliban side, and we know that, the government is dealing with that challenge. But even then, there is this certainty at this time, and we've spoken about the dollar also, and at this time, things stabilizing on that front also. So you think that this kind of investment is now likely to increase?
It is highly possible, because you're absolutely right that as far as people having a desire to invest in Pakistan and the demand for Pakistani assets exists, this is about as good as it has gotten in the past. It's not like things were fantastic previously. Going back, I'm talking 50 years, it's not like things were far better back then in terms of investment climate. So if anything, now is the time. But investment appetite is competitive. So what you have is Pakistan as an emerging market, but you also have other emerging markets. And even if we are working hard, I think it's important to acknowledge that other countries are working very hard as well. Cutthroat competition. These are your typical countries you may hear about, like Vietnam, Bangladesh, and so on. They also work hard. So who works the hardest shall win the race. And for example, let's take Vietnam's case. They import 90% of GDP plus to export 100% of GDP. I mean, that is an extraordinary number. So they are ruthless and hardworking, and we need to be as ruthless and as hardworking in terms of, and ruthlessness is not a negative word in this context. It is a positive word in the sense that being cutthroat and driven to make the best business-friendly climate. Ali Saab has commented on that, and I believe that that work is required. Just remember that we are not competing with a giant like China. We have plenty of competition of our own size, and that's where we have to keep going.
In terms of how we are moving forward, what are indicators that you see, overall, when we look at the economic palette, for example, that are sort of, going in the right direction?
The most important targets that I want to focus on are the ones that the IMF focuses on. So they talk about revenue collection. That would be a positive thing. One that they don't talk about enough, but which I care about, is expenditure to GDP, because if you reduce that, you would reduce the footprint. The other is the not a popular one, but important one, is the number of steps it takes to start a business.
Yeah.
Another one is private credit, because it's not just that the government spends on its own bureaucracy through the private banking system, but private credit so that businesses are borrowing. Another one is the energy price. So how much is it in rupees per unit of electricity here versus in other countries? And we're about triple what it would be in a comparable country. And then, of course, I think that there's two very important ones that matter to you and me, which is the literacy rate and the infant mortality rate. And I'm not just saying that as a humanist, but also as an economist, because these days it's considered very good that we are sending perhaps expelling our talent abroad. And the truth is that if you consider remittances to be good, then fine, but there's two inputs that are required to make remittances rise, which is education and healthcare. We have to invest in our people. So those are ones that I would consider as an economist, not just purely as a humanist.
When we look at the kind of reforms that are still underway, how do you see, like you said, the political will is at its optimum, and we've seen the resilience there, even when faced with multiple challenges, when the government also came in, and consistently also. In terms of those changes, how do you see us moving forward? Do you see this? Of course, I mean, it's a continual effort, right? It's not, something that and we have made changes.
Yes.
But how do you see that moving forward in terms of advancement also?
The areas where I see advancement and progress are at the operational level. Strategically, as I said, and as you agree, we are aligned. The IMF is aligned with us. Very good. But at the operational level, there are increasing benchmarks. For example, there's a revenue target. Or, for example, they expect us to release the following data by a certain time that has a certain quality, like data quality. These are concrete measures, and it's actually quite a long list of things that they expect. And that's where I expect to see progress, because I expect the government, and not just as a centralized thing, but even further down at the ministerial level, then at the provincial level as well. I expect these institutions to adhere to the deadlines for which we as a whole have agreed to follow for our own good.
I want to take Ali's opinion on this also. Ali, can you hear me?
Yeah.
When we look at structural reforms, that has been a bane of our existence if we look at the past also, and I'm sure you appreciate that. But we've also seen, like I said, a consistent effort at play here. We know recently that it was said that this is more than a policy movement, it is a turning of the page, it is also, a fundamental transition from a regulatory state to a developmental state. Do you agree with that? Do you think that we are sufficiently moving in that direction to become a developmental state?
I believe that we are actually. I think that ever since, Pakistan has been a highly regulated economy and a highly regulated state also, with a very expanded bureaucracy since the 70s. And I think that is something that, especially the government in power, Pakistan Muslim League Noon, has identified for a pretty long time, and now they've had a chance to actually go into this and actually conduct the reform that they wanted to. They were, when previously also they were in government, the direction of the reform was practically the same. What is required, and I second what Dr. Usman has also said, is that expenditure and a shrinking overall of the government needs to occur. And that will really allow the potential of economic progress and development to become unleashed, and we should get to where we want to get to. We want to improve the economic prospects of the people of Pakistan, and I think the way to go towards that is to have a greater reliance on the private sector, and not just the local private sector, but the international private sector, and to make Pakistan into, a place where business can be conducted without any other complication. And I think that in terms of structural reform, the government has really, they're saying the right things, right? So more recently, you must have heard that there has been discussion about reducing the corporate tax rate, reducing certain additional tax measures so that businesses can conduct themselves in a more fair and level playing field. And I think that is really the name of the game these days. It's the level playing field that the government is working on. And instead of making Pakistan's industry, dependent on subsidies, dependent on giveaways and bailouts, we really need to move towards a more sustainable way of making progress and growth. And I think that when it comes to the investment in healthcare and education, really the government needs to have a look in this modern era where we can provide education remotely at a very high quality and at very low cost. I think people need to have access to mobile phones, they need to have access to internet networks. That's still somewhat of a struggle. And then they need to have access to education, which is low cost and very high quality. And same goes for healthcare. In the case of healthcare, there is some kind of policy issue there, if I may venture there. I think the pharmaceutical sector is doing excellent these days, and they're quite happy with the regulatory environment provided to them. But when it comes to healthcare services, Pakistan continues to export a lot of doctors to other countries, and they provide critical resources in terms of remittances. And so the government needs to look into this, how we could maybe expand healthcare and reduce healthcare cost, and maybe look also into it.
Right. Thank you so much, Saeed Ali Ehsan. Thank you for being. Dr. Usman Chohan, thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for being with